Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Thursday, March 6th, 2025. I'm Dr. Umoja Smalls, Director of Professional Development for the Maryland Department of Health Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to today's Rate Review Advisory Group meeting. Before we begin our meeting, we also want to ensure civility for all of our meetings. The free expression of diverse viewpoints is a fundamental value of our group. This freedom carries the responsibility to engage respectfully, which means treating one another with dignity, respect, and in good faith. Uncivil behavior, disruptive actions, abusive language, threats, or harassment will not be tolerated and may result in removal from the meeting. Thank you for helping to keep this productive and comfortable for everyone. All participants are in listen-only mode. There are two options to hear the webinar: by computer and phone. This webinar will be recorded and will be posted on YouTube and the DDA website. Today's PowerPoint will be made available to you to download from the DDA website and is also available for you to download in the materials section. If you're an attendee, please place your questions in the question box, which is the small icon with a question mark on it. During the public comment section of today's presentation, the DDA's team will respond to questions posted and provide an opportunity for you to also ask questions directly by calling your name. You will then be able to unmute your mic and ask your question. And now I'd like to introduce Deputy Secretary Marlena Hutchinson to begin today's meeting. Good afternoon, Marlena.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to March's meeting. This is our second meeting for this calendar year. Really looking forward to some good discussion today. Dr. Smalls, if we can go to the next slide. With that, today's agenda, we are going to talk more about the aspects of employment services, including those service definitions, potential overlaps, current billing practices, our utilization analysis, and outcome-based approaches. Additionally, we will discuss some technical assistance and training around the general ledger template. Now I'll turn it over to Robert to start today's discussion.
Thank you, Marlene, and good afternoon, everyone. Members were sent an email on February 27th with the meeting minutes attached. Would like to make a motion to approve the minutes. Would a member like to second?
Next slide, please.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Now we'll go ahead and get started with our discussion related to employment services and specifically follow-on supports. I'm going to turn it over to Steve Schramm from Optimus to get us started.
Great, thank you. Can we go to the next slide, please? One more, please. Thank you. So this slide lays out the conversation today for employment services. We've set aside 25 or 30 minutes of today's conversation to talk about employment services, and we've split it into three sections. As the Deputy Secretary said, we want to start out with establishing some common ground around the service definitions, and then understand from the members of the RAG where you see the challenges, and have a robust conversation about how we may address some of those challenges with the service overlaps that happen. We would also like to make certain that we have, as part of the conversation, a discussion about the current process for employment services and follow-along supports, so that through this rate review, not only are we considering adapting the rate itself, but also we learn how we improve the internal processes so that the service in general works more effectively. The second area is the group had asked that Hilltop Optimists do a review of the lead webinar series and summarize some of the information. I sat through the 3 webinars, and I've got some notes on it, and I actually have some slides. I think it's a really good conversation about the art of the possible for where we could go in the future for the follow-on supports rate. And then if we have time, occasionally Mean and Heartless Steve comes out, and we have to cut some things if we have time. We have a couple slides on utilization, and we also have some slides at the end that if we have time, we'll address those as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Rhonda to talk to the next slide, so that we can establish some foundation on a working definition for follow-along supports.
Thank you, Steve. So yeah, some information related to follow along that's noted within our waiver and policy. Follow along supports are periodic supports after the person has transitioned into their job. This occurs after the participant has transitioned into competitive integrated employment. It ensures that the person has the assistance necessary to maintain their job. And follow along supports includes at least 2 direct face-to-face contacts with the person during the course of a month. It may also include other types of interventions, such as, but not limited to, phone calls to the person and or their employer, general coordination needed to support a person to maintain their employment, and direct support contacts are not required to take place at the employment site. It really should be based on the preference of the participant and the employer, and that should be coordinated. Direct support contacts can be completed using virtual supports, so utilizing technology to FaceTime, Skype, things like that, to support the person as indicated in their person-centered plan. We wanted to also note that it's really important that employment supports should not duplicate other Medicaid waiver services, such as housing supports and case management and other services. And it's important for participants in general to be supported holistically and have their backup plan, including emergency plans when staff are not available. And then lastly, we would just also share that participants receiving follow-along supports can also be authorized to receive the standalone transportation services to support them in that avenue. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Steve.
All right, so idea behind this is just to have some foundation that we can all look at. And then I'm going to actually ask us to rehash a little of the conversation in the last meeting. And so there were points brought up by Karen Lee, Karen Gilchrist, Donna, Greg, Chris, David, Sean, actually you all chimed in. And so I may bring some of those back up about the current challenges in follow-along supports, and then ask you to explain. Today's conversation is meant to be collaborative and open, where we discuss what the challenges are and see if we can identify solutions to those challenges. And so the first issue that I'm going to bring up that came from the last conversation, Karen Lee, you had mentioned that you had some concerns about the ratio of direct to indirect. The rate currently now has 3 hours indirect to 1 hour direct. That's the way it's built when we do the rate setting, okay? And so help us understand where you see some challenges in that indirect to direct in your practical experience with the follow-along supports rate.
So I guess I'd like to see that number broken down. I haven't seen it broken down that way.
Okay.
So this as the follow along, the way I think it was kind of originally calculated was that you have for somebody who's stable in their position, they don't have a new manager.
Yep.
They don't have a change in job. They don't have a new location they're moving to, right? They're just stable. They're doing their job. That they would need support, and we want to make sure that we are contacting the employer because that's just good best practice. That
yep.
And the person also may say, I don't want you talking to my employer, or they may say, I'll meet with you, but I'm not going to meet with you at my employer. I'll meet with you. Well, we can have lunch together or something. They usually get to decide that. Yeah. And then, so thinking about the travel time to and from each different location and spending maybe 2 hours twice a month. So
Yep.
every other week you're spending about 2 hours. It's what I think it looks in practical nature. So larger organizations that do more employment services may have a team of job coaches or employment consultants that's what they do. They do the static ongoing, the support for drop in.
Yep.
And so when you start calculating out, if you have a ratio of maybe they've got, we backed into the hours, and I have a whole formula where, every staff person works 40 hours a week. They get 2 weeks of holiday. They get 2 weeks of vacation. We have, generally in Maryland, we have 4 days of snow. They've got 6 days of sick, so they're working X number of hours. So on the weeks that they're working, they're working an average of 26 hours of direct time.
Yep.
And then we backed into if they were working, and with what the rate of pay is right now, because since they're outward facing, they tend to be higher paid than entry level DSPs. They tend to be what we think of as like DSP3s. So they're generally making anywhere between 45 and low 50s.
Okay.
On that job coach level.
Yep.
So that's very kind of your entry level in that area.
Yep.
So when we backed into it, we needed their hourly rate to be, I think it was $54 an hour or something, fully loaded, not with the brick, but with our expenses, and for the amount of times they're doing things like benefits, helping to coordinate transportation, things that are indirect for them.
Yep.
We were looking at the 1-to-3 ratio generally for every 1 hour. So those people are generally spending about, they're generally spending about 4 hours a month direct, plus with transportation. So they're spending about 10 to 14 hours a month per person.
Yep.
And when we backed into what the rate is, the rate was not enough to support that staff person.
Okay. I think, and Caleb, you can correct me, I think we use an assumption of 3 to 1 and 8 hours a month. So
yeah, that's right.
Okay.
8 hours of direct, or
8 hours total.
Oh, 8 hours total. Okay, so I think that's low.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good comment. Want to make certain I get a lot out on the table so we can have a robust conversation. Several of you brought up examples of services that you felt like weren't covered. You were doing things for these individuals that you weren't getting paid for. So throw those out on the table now so we can have a good discussion about that.
Well, I just think, like as Karen had mentioned, that if people are in stable positions, right, and they don't need as much, there are times where they may get a new position or need to learn to new skills or get a new manager, a new supervisor, new coworker dynamics, right? That sometimes then we have to provide on the job coaching, even if we're not funded to get that on the job coaching for the individual right away. And even if we do a plan revision to try to get that or try to work with doors, sometimes it's not as speedy as maybe we would.
So you don't flip them over into ongoing during that time?
Sometimes we're not funded unless the person has the job already. Like, so that's if they don't have it built in. Some individuals plans, depending, and that could be some of CCS dynamics maybe, that we're not getting success in getting the ongoing job supports in the person's plan if they are in a stable position. We would, if the person has it, then yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? So do they have follow-along supports in their plan? They just don't have ongoing?
Correct.
They have,
correct.
okay.
And so, and then, we can try to get the team meeting quickly, but then it just takes some time. And sometimes it's successful with doors to try to get some hours quickly, but not always.
Would it be helpful to define what stable in the job means? Because I think I would think of that differently than other people. Is that something that maybe we could discuss to talk about what that is? Because that may help to get what you're talking about in terms of the need for ongoing.
Yeah.
And you're talking about like being able to flow between because people's situations may
Yes.
change. I may not be stable. So something, is that something maybe you
Yeah, I
could
think
share?
we created our own rule because we were part of creating of the rate. What we said was, if you end up going to support somebody on any given week for more than, I think, 25% of what their hours worked are, we flip into ongoing. So we use follow along. So if it ends up being, if we're figuring like 10 hours a month per person, and if we have to flip into X number more, like 12 or 14, then we flip into ongoing after that. So we've done that internally as an organization. Because I never saw the guidance on that. I did ask for guidance on that, but we didn't. And I think it was just a level of detail. And, we support a couple hundred, almost 300 people in employment every day. So.
Can I just ask, so
Yeah.
if that situation occurs, I need a little bit more support.
Yeah.
So you'd flip over to ongoing, you would bill ongoing, you're not billing follow along at that time.
We would keep billing follow along
Okay.
for that month because we were only billing kind of above the follow along hours. Yeah. Because it's a milestone payment, and you can always do milestones the same time that you do a fee for service quarterly or quarter hour. That's why it was a milestone.
See lots of people thinking about this, lots of noodling going on. Okay.
Steve,
Yeah.
it's Chris. Just throw one thought out there. I think when we start to try to define what is stable for one individual, we've got to kind of keep in the back of our head that's going to look different for everybody. We can come up with a benchmark, but my level of stability, I may automatically just have higher needs across the board. And then you had mentioned earlier, there's 3 indirect hours built into the 1 hour of billable direct, essentially within follow along. Didn't realize that, and all the time that we've talked about the rates, love to see that calculation if possible.
Sure. Absolutely.
Am I the only one that missed that?
And I had never heard that either. No.
Team, Donna has a question. If I might
I think
interrupt,
Karen
Donna
was talking.
has her hand raised.
Sure. Go ahead, Donna.
So I was just thinking about our last conversation, the last meeting we had. We talked about some of the other costs or some of the other tasks or responsibilities that we do have with people. And, that is things that come up every day with them, or trying to help them with something that might be happening with housing or their uniform, or they forgot they had a medical appointment. Now you got to go get them. You got to get them, take them to that appointment, come back. Or there are other things that factor into the employment that we become that contact person for them. There are not other services that they're getting that would cover that. This is the only service that they have. And we did talk a little bit about that last time. And you don't generally, some people are more needy in terms of those type of extra supports, and you don't really realize how much that is adding up until you really sit down and start putting it on paper, and then you realize the time. Sometimes it can involve 2 different people from your organization, not just the person who's with them trying to figure something out. We've had cases with financial stuff, housing stuff, transportation. It just depends. I mean, you asked for that a few minutes ago, what some of those other
Yeah, absolutely.
time is. Yeah. It's about the whole person, even when you may be doing just the work piece, but it's really about the whole person to keep that work piece stable.
Okay.
And so for, Donna, if I could just ask, for individuals, when you do discover that possibly the employment support is the only service that they have primarily, are there opportunities there to explore other supports to help fill in? Maybe they do need housing support services, and some of these other supports that kind of focus on these areas.
I think sometimes, Rhonda, the way that works is you're thinking this is a kind of one and done, and then you realize 2 weeks later this has come up again, and then you realize something else. And so then you may call the team meeting to see if there's other services that they are eligible for. But sometimes it takes quite a few months to get to that point. And you have spent considerable time. The first time somebody makes that call, hey, I missed my ride, or I couldn't figure out my medical appointment, we don't immediately just refer them for other services. We see how we can help them do that. We do find that more often at times with people who are more independent with their jobs because they don't have all of those other supports already.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps, but
Yeah, and just another one just for group discussion. Do people have contingency plans? Do they have backup plans, emergency plans? So as you start to work with me and I tend to have something challenge with my transportation or something comes up, is there opportunities then to develop some strategies and plans to walk alongside the person, right, to help them with learning and being able to, address some of those things and be proactive, preventive?
or I can't speak for all providers, but we all do that when we sit down at the table. Or, what if Van Gogh doesn't show? What would you do? Oh, I'm going to call, and usually it's us that they call. Okay, if Van Gogh can't take you, who can take you then? We work through those things, but they by no means line up and happen perfectly. Most times they don't happen perfectly, but they are discussed.
Okay.
And it is very difficult to keep those type plans in place on a consistent basis. I think a lot of providers would probably answer that the same way. It's kind of like perfect world scenarios.
Yeah, this is Karen. I would agree with Donna. Those things kind of happen on the spot, and typically we've had conversations about contingency plans, but then we as the provider become that contingency plan. So then we figure it out, and it's happening like in the here and now. So there's no time to say, okay, we'll refer you to something else, or we'll come up with a contingency plan now. We do it. We just do it because it needs to happen right then. And that's just typically how it happens. That we just need that flexibility because these things happen, and sometimes it's very simple things. I lost my ID. I need to go get another ID. I need to go to Social Security. I forgot I had an appointment. Those kinds of things. And when they happen, we respond to it.
So I was at the National Employment First meeting downtown in Odeb last week, and this came up as kind of a primary topic was that that there's really kind of like three levels of benefits planning with people. There's the, hey, you should probably work. You're going to be okay. We're going to work with you on your benefits. Then there's once the person starts working and you kind of work through their benefits. But the piece that I think that the employment community had never anticipated is that there is this ongoing benefits work that has to be done because of an overpayment. And as somebody who's Social Security, my father-in-law was just killed by Social Security, and it took us a senator's call and a whole bunch of other people and bringing my 94-year-old father-in-law to a Social Security office to show that he was alive. The negotiation and navigation with Social Security is insane.
Yep.
And so I will say that one of the things from the waiver advisory committee, two committees, was one of the requests that came in was that we add benefits planning and benefits work to the waiver as a reimbursable service, as a separate reimbursable service. And I would like to use the Dr. Lisa Mills, who's the person that you watch those. She actually has some statistics about how much benefits planning needs to be in everybody's annual work. And so we could actually get her to give us some of that data, not just not just, the year they get their job, but kind of ongoing what needs to happen. I think Michael Dalto also has some really good data on that here in Maryland, and I know that he'd be more than willing to work with us on this.
Okay. So I have, I brought with me some Post-it notes just to make certain that we list out some of the challenges. And I put on there the direct to indirect. And Chris, you asked if we had talked about this previously. I can go back and listen to either the January or the February meetings, but I think Caleb had described the rate setting methodology with the 3-to-1 ratio in the past, but that's on me to go back and find that. So I'll do that research based on your request. The next one is this, thought of contingency and additional services. Shauna, you brought up a process question about how do we make certain that we're utilizing the correct services when. So I think that's a takeaway from this. Karen, you and Donna had both brought up this idea of 8 hours isn't enough for follow-along supports. So that's a follow-up item that we need to talk about. And then Rhonda, you had asked a question about is there a definitional or a process solution that we can help with in terms of when do we access other services? And then a fourth issue that I'm going to bring up is just in general this idea of I still feel like when people are asking questions, we're not all on the same page as to how the process ought to be working from a timing perspective. So Shauna, you brought up, you know what, we try, but sometimes CCS is not timely. And Karen, you had brought that up in the past. David, you had brought up some of your team's frustrations about asking for things and then not being able to get stuff done and the job disappears. And so I think that's something we need to have as a follow-up as well.
Can I just, I think I've heard Rhonda offer the possibility of and I hear things all the time, some of them actually real, but a detailed side-by-side comparison, a discussion of the definitions of follow along and ongoing, so that as we contemplate, Donna did and Karen combined to do a magnificent job in just sort of describing life happens. And we do a hell of a lot of contingency planning. And don't you know, we try to predict as much as we can, and it just falls apart almost inevitably. So to understand what distinguishes follow along, because we think we know it, and ongoing could be a really sort of insightful exercise to get to how do we contemplate the fluidity of life and where do we toggle what source to make sure that, exactly to Donna's point, that the service just keeps going so that the person holds that competitive one.
I will say that we do not flip into ongoing for the things that Donna was talking about. We kind of eat those costs.
Yeah, I conflated the two. I'm saying,
no, but I think that's
it's really important.
Yeah, but I think that's important that we actually only do it for on the job work. We do oftentimes have some CDS hours that we wrap around people for other things like that, like a job club. A lot of people participate in a job, that kind of thing, which goes to the, not, they don't just get ongoing, but we have an infrastructure to do that. We're a large employment provider, and so we have so many different infrastructures that people who only serve a small number of people might not have.
And CDS would be a great opportunity. It's community engagement, right? To take me down to the Social Security office and walk alongside me in that journey for resolution of those things, or get my new bus pass. So that's an opportunity to do versus tapping in and looking at from follow along.
Yeah. And not everybody has that infrastructure, but
well, and it's it's complex and it's complicated. So there's a multiple choice here, quiz here. Which do I choose?
I guess my question would be in terms of the CDS aspect. I mean, it's very easy to ask for CDS services, to stack services for someone. If what you're saying is when I have to go down to the Social Security office with Joe, I can then use that under CDS service. But that's not quite the way I think of CDS services. I think it's more for in their community doing things that way. It's not taking care of those things for them. So I'm not sure I really understand how CDS could be an avenue for most of the things that the 3 or 4 of us just listed.
I
Would
think
it be
that's great.
appropriate to add this to number 2? And for those online, number 2 is ongoing versus follow-along supports.
Yes.
The DOORS system is not as easy to maneuver, especially when people are working. And we work in multiple states with vocational rehabilitation. And the Maryland DOORS system is the most difficult service system that we work in for vocational rehabilitation. And while I understand that, I think that's something that senior leadership needs to focus on, because when you talk about the coordination of our services and supports, folks they should be tapping into. Absolutely. And DDA should not be accessed because we're the easiest to navigate. So I like that we put doors there, because that's something that I need to take up on behalf of the administration and the providers. And I will tell you, since at least 30 years, that has been a goal of DDA leadership. And I appreciate, again, getting a renewal from the DDA leadership that partnership is important, and I wish you the best of luck. We're all in it together to figure it out, right?
That's why we're here.
Yeah. I mean,
The other thing that I think we should,
an employment first state, so everything needs to be in alignment with that.
It does. Call out and flag is something that I heard Chris say in regard to the individuality and intersectionality when we're talking about stability and each person. So I think that too could go under number 2, right? When do you flip? Because it's based on when an individual is like stable and in most.
Okay.
And I'd like to suggest we put CDS up there too.
Yeah.
CDS would never even cross my lips.
Steve, just to clarify, and I'm looking at an older version, but the service authorization guidelines under the conflict section, we said employment services not available at the same time as career exploration, community development services, day have medical day. And I understand it's the timing at the same exact moment, but if we're going to be crossing between those two services or have permission to do that, then there needs to be a very clear line on when it's okay to do that and when it's not.
Yeah, and
I'm like Don, I'm looking at the guidelines and I would never have thought, say, I can blend CDS into this.
Right, and Chris, at this juncture, we're putting everything out there for consideration. Of course, it's going to take a lot of investigation, fine tuning, and so forth. But you should see the heads in the room as we're all thinking through and nodding and so forth. How can we be creative in supporting individuals?
One other thing that I want to bring up before we transition to the lead webinar slides. As we have been having this conversation, there is a theme that everybody's bringing up, and it may just be a header above number 2, or it may be its own idea, and that is this idea that when we're talking about the follow-on supports, we want to look at them big picture from a process perspective and make certain that the process is working effectively, not just in follow-along supports, but among all services. And so I don't know if that's just a modification of number 2, and maybe what we've listed becomes 2A, so that's the header, or it gets its own standalone because it has 2 components, right? It has the process of follow-along supports, but it also has the bigger picture 360 view to make certain that we're incorporating all of the service conversations. Okay?
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, so I'm going to add that. Dr. Smalls, is it okay if we go to the next slide, please?
Steve, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
I think this came on the email, but I'm a hard copy guy, so I printed it. There's a document here called Mutual Roles Between DDA and Doors. Was that a nod to part of number 2, and that is to distinguish between 2 sets of responsibilities?
Yes, so this is roles and responsibilities. The group had asked, can we get a copy of the MOU? There was some much gnashing of teeth at doors, and there was a lot of negotiations to get a portion of the actual document, and that's the roles and responsibilities that you're looking at.
Got it, thank you.
Okay, so and we're actually going to talk a little bit about that on later slides. Okay, so the identification of the challenges, I wanted to wait before we showed this slide so that we had the conversation first, and they're still the same issues. And so we hit the things on this slide. Dr. Smalls, can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so outcome-based rates. This was a really big point that was brought up in the last meeting. And so the request was, actually it was 2 meetings ago, that we sit through the webinar series and try to identify some themes. So I'm going a little bit quickly because we're a bit behind schedule, and I want to make certain that we have time to hit everything. Look, you all have been in DD rate setting for much longer than I have, and I've been in it for 35 years. And so the pendulum constantly swings back and forth. Do we pay for staff time? Do we pay for outcomes? And for the current rate setting methodology, it is tilted more towards paying for staff time. People were complaining I wasn't getting the face-to-face staff time. The lead webinars very much focus on pivoting back to paying for outcomes. And when they talk about outcomes, they talked about some things that we didn't talk about, which I thought were really interesting. So we did talk about the number of hours per week, but we didn't really talk about, is level of pay a good indicator of an outcome? So if someone gets paid more over time, is that a positive outcome? Is there a starting salary that should get you a higher payment than if you have a lower starting salary, right? It was a really interesting conversation about what is pay an indicator of? Is it only incremental, or is it relative that we should be looking at the start? David, you seem to be thinking.
I have lots and lots of thoughts. Some of it. Keep going. You're
all right.
Going...
Duration came up, and they thought of duration a bunch of different ways. They were looking at duration internally and externally. Duration from the member's perspective can be beneficial. Duration from the agency's perspective can actually be a negative, meaning that you're not necessarily getting paid for doing the right thing. Greg, I'm not doing a good job of relaying your point, but your point was, I'm doing the right thing and I'm keeping somebody in a service, and you're reducing the amount that you're paying me, and so I kind of get screwed for doing the right thing. So what they're trying to do with adapting the rate methodologies is they're trying to figure out creative ways to say what are we pushing for? We're going to pay for what we're pushing for, but we also don't want to miss that if we show lower payments, that it will result in resources being taken away. So there's this inherent tension in paying for outcomes. And I want to make certain that we are talking about that inherent tension. Because if you think about paying for outcomes, sometimes what that means is we're going to have sloping that would see fewer resources for somebody who's been in the service longer, unless we get creative in how we pay people.
Right. So one of the options is to pay people for the number of hours that they work and pay for longevity on the job. And
Yep.
that's the Wisconsin did that.
And I have
Yeah.
a couple slides. If you guys had a chance to look at the deck beforehand, I showed some examples. So one of the other things is that the webinar series very much focuses on, look, we need to account for the people's needs. So this is an echo of the stability comment, but reality is different individuals at different phases of their lives need different resources allocated to them. And you can still do averages, but you differentiate among those averages by separating people into groups. Okay, and you do it by looking at things like their acuity, the staff involvement, how much time people have to dedicate to a particular individual. One of the more creative things is you use quality payments. So you use one-time payments, a couple, once or twice a year, that are more lump sum payments. Hey, you hit a certain milestone, and so we're going to pay because if you would not have hit that milestone, it would have cost the state a lot more. So notice how I put that qualifier in at the end, right? We just have to be honest about the fiscal realities right now, right? And there's going to have to be some recognition of the fiscal realities, and that gets to the last piece of the outcome-based rates. You have to modify the metrics of what's a successful program, because if all you do is look at cost of employment services, you all will be successful and you'll get more people into employment services. And the metric for your success, reducing the cost of employment services, will not be met and you won't get any more funding. So you have to change the metric of success to be on a per outcome basis. What do you decide? Is it quality of hours? Is it duration of hours? Is it divided by the inverse of your hourly wage, right? You have to think about new metrics in order to define the success of the program. Dr. Smalls, go to the next slide, please. So this one is actually a Wisconsin example. So Karen Lee, you've seen this one before, but this introduces a couple of the concepts. Look, it has member acuity in that first column. So it has rows, right? Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. And then it has length of time on the job going to the right. And it has fading in it, right? We call fading sloping if you're a rate setter, you call that sloping. You see that the dollars for those individuals go down. So here's where the next slide comes in and becomes really interesting. So I'm actually going to walk up to the screen. So I apologize for you electronically, but see this 768? That's about a fourth of the tier 1 30/40. So one of the things, just like you talk about braiding of resources, Dr. Smalls, can we go to the next slide? You can also do braiding of payment. So Tennessee uses a slope approach like that, where they have acuity and they have things like duration, but they do quality payments. You've been able to keep someone in this job and you've met a milestone that we define. And so here's a quality payment. And again, I know this is going to cause consternation. It is based on you reducing the overall spend, and you accept that fading of the rates, but there are some additional dollars if you achieve outcomes.
This is all Lisa Mills's work.
Yep.
She worked at both of them because they had a 10 care and she worked in the Wisconsin one.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have a question. Are there any models out there that any of us are aware of? And I'm asking this question because of, my experience in the acute care setting where you have these value-based payments for hitting certain metrics or being on the right side of the equation. But then the inverse of that is, kind of a penalty for not hitting certain
So you don't get
quality
any
measures.
more.
So when the other Medicaid structure, which is on the institutional side, we do have what we call a quality assessment. And so you have your winners and losers. You have your nursing facilities that, by way of outcome driven, meeting certain milestones, they do get an outcome based payment. And then you have the losers, for lack of a better term, who don't.
Yeah, because we used to love it when Johns Hopkins didn't hit their performance measures, right? Because that controls the pot of money that's used and it keeps it budget neutral.
Yeah.
So I would say that Maryland DDAs, having Discovery 1, 2, and 3, which is considered the best practice, that some people jump right into job development rather than using customized employment strategies. And so I would say that you're doing it in Maryland, because by having Discovery 1, Discovery 2, and Discovery 3 and specific outcomes, those that are based on best practice and quality, that it means that the job placement is probably better than if we just jump right into job development for people. And then the long-term supports are more stable because we've used the best practice up front. So I actually think that our system does that.
So one way, Robert, to get Dr. Smalls, can you go to the prior slide, please? 13. One way you can get there is if you look at the way this table is set up and the sloping, the 30-40 and the 768. If you're successful in an outcomes-based methodology, let's say that you set your scaling here so that it assumes that people are equally distributed in every one of these buckets. And yet you as providers get better at it, you will start seeing people down in the right-hand side of this. And so that's how you set aside the money to pay the quality bonuses, right? You actually build in. That's one way of doing it. What the deputy secretary was describing is there are forms of withholds or additional assessments that you can say, I've set aside a portion of the budget for actual quality payments. You can either take it off the top up front, or you can have it be after the fact if you're successful in moving people to the right. So there's a lot of ways you can do this from a budget neutral perspective. So I think the art of the possible leads us to believe other states are doing it. We can do things like that. I will say we can't do a more complex rate methodology until we get the basic blocking and tackling of the general ledger template done. But this is where we should be thinking about going next.
Can I just say though, I think one of the things, especially the 10 care example, is because Dr. Mills was kind of the director of TennCare at the time for the IDD world, she could look at this kind of payment for everything. So providers created an infrastructure to get paid this way.
Yes.
And this would be a standalone situation compared to the other, these are both managed care examples,
Yes.
right? And so having multiple infrastructures in your finance department, I mean, I actually think that's one of the reasons why people don't access doors, is because their requirements are, if they were a huge fiscal player for us, I would develop the infrastructure in my organization to use doors. And we do because we are a big provider of employment services. But small organizations that are only doing a small number of these kinds of services would need such a significant infrastructure to support these kinds of services that it's not fiscally feasible. Like the amount of time you've got to develop the relationships with your VR department, your local folks, that they know you, that your staff know how to use the documentation, and because their documentations are different. That's one of the reasons why I'm asking to see the MOU, is because if they're asking for something completely different than what DDA is asking for, it means that we need separate infrastructures. And organizations that are large have those infrastructures, but small organizations, or organizations that do a small percentage of this service, they don't have the resources, or have not developed the resources to develop these separate infrastructures. And that's true when you start looking at systems like this is such a completely different infrastructure than the rest of the payment system.
Yep.
That you would have to move the entire system to an infrastructure like this for it to be fiscally feasible for providers.
Yep. It's a good point. All right, so let's do a time check. We've gone over on our time a little bit. I don't want to leave this until everybody feels like they had the opportunity to bring up points, even if all we're doing is capturing in the parking lot for the next conversation. So I want to just open it to the group. Greg, Donna, Karen, Laura, Chris on the phone. Any additional points we want to make certain we get out before we transition quickly to data and general ledger?
Steve, the only thing I would ask is that somehow whatever you've got written on the wall, because we can't see it, is incorporated either into the minutes or some kind of a slide.
Chris, we can't read it.
Yeah. You can't read it. You can't see it. It is purpose.
Fair enough.
Steve, let's get on incorporated into the minutes.
We'll get them incorporated into the minutes. All right, anybody in the room? I like your sense of humor, David. Great.
So the only comment that I would add to this conversation is that I think in every step of development, we need to ask. I'm sorry. I believe in every step of development, if we move forward, we need to ask the question: are we incenting the correct things?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to observe, just to riff off of that. You're describing what I see as, it doesn't mean that it is, but what I see is sort of almost at this point classic value-based healthcare, value-based reimbursement, and picking the incentives, and every bit as importantly, understanding what is ironclad in funding and whether or not it actually approaches covering costs is everything. And so lots of providers in long-term care space, including us, see and hear value-based reimbursements and freak out because we've done a lousy job in other parts of the country when trying to introduce value-based reimbursements in long-term services and supports. We've done a terrible job generally. And so there's a lot of bias out there, which just informs the environment. I think for me, this is absolutely directionally appropriate.
Okay.
With the caveat, the incentives matter, to Greg's point, and so too does the sort of base.
Yep.
And this is Karen. I guess along to what Greg was saying, and I'm just looking at these models and find them very interesting. But also making sure when we talk about are we incentivizing the right things, but also validating whatever assumptions may be made in these. Because as I quickly look through them, there are some assumptions that in my head I'm going to, oh, so if you work less hours, maybe you need less support, or I don't know. I'm just looking at this for the first time and just want to make sure any assumptions that are made as we go forward with this, that we validated those assumptions are real.
And these people, that Inclusa, which has now been bought out by somebody else in managed care, but the Inclusa folks do have, Karen, if you look it up, you could probably Google it. They actually have a set of assumptions that go along with this.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Donna, I think you had your hand raised.
Yeah, my thought was still back a couple slides before this one when one of the examples you gave was in reference to the level of someone's rate of pay. And I'm assuming that was referring to the person that you've placed to assist to get the job. That I
Yes.
think just needs a lot more discussion as well.
Okay.
I know we're going to pick this up at another time, but yeah, that I have quite a few thoughts on. So
Great. Okay. Let's drop down to slide, I believe it's 15. Caleb.
Hi, my name's Caleb Levon. I'm going to be talking about utilization and the recent patterns in that, but I'm going to shrink it down. We already had shrunk this material, and you can see some of it in the appendix. And I'll try to be very brief here. This is for fiscal year 2024. It doesn't include the milestone services, which are honestly a very small amount of the total expenditures. So we're looking at the job development, ongoing job supports, and follow along supports. And so this is the total expenditures was about 12 million for job development, 20 million for ongoing job supports, and a little over 8 million for follow-on support. So that just gives you some sense of the relative scale and the overall size of these employment services. There is also some self-direction in the ongoing job supports mostly, and that amounts to about 4 million total for fiscal year 2024. On the next slide.
Can I ask clarification on that?
Yes, sorry.
Go back one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So because we are a state that requires credentialing for our employment services, in the self-direction, are those bought by providers who have the credential, or are they the credential, they are self-directed staff that have been credentialed? And how are we looking at those credentials?
So I would say from my view and understanding with the waiver, the credentials are required for milestone and job development. We don't require them for ongoing or follow-up. So if you look at the meaningful day policy and the training requirements, it'll specifically state what training is required for job development milestone. So that's something that the waiver work group can look at, and whether or not under the self-directed model, should employment services be budget authority, where you would hire a qualified provider who has staff that have the credentials, or should it continue to be able to have only the two options that they have under employer authority, which is ongoing job supports and follow-on support.
Thank you.
Next
slide.
Under the requirement.
The both models, the training requirements are the same for both models. I think the question is are those still the current training requirements? Should follow along and ongoing have the credentialing or other requirements? Should it be an employer and budget authority or just budget authority. All those can be reviewed and considered.
Yeah, we definitely should be using this as the platform and opportunity to revisit those kinds of things.
I think in that light, you might want to look back at, the BLS job code that was used to determine that way, and whether or not the thinking was that they would have those qualifications.
So here we're seeing the tremendous growth in employment services over the last few years. It's grown from a very small amount up to roughly 5 million per month for the total expenditures in employment services. Self-direction started out on a relatively equal basis, but it has not grown in the same way. And that growth in employment services constitutes both quite a bit more unique users, but also more hours per user for both job development and ongoing jobs supports. So that growth has been pretty tremendous over the last few years. And that's what I have on data utilization. There's more material in the appendix. There's more material I can provide, but we've got a pretty limited time frame here.
I think the other thing that's kind of interesting is when you look at the public health emergency and the trend of employment going up is great.
Absolutely.
I thought also, if I could, Steve, I could respond in real time here to Chris Park's earlier question about the direct and indirect. I think we could just 30 seconds here explain that.
Sure.
So the rate for follow along supports, it's a monthly rate and it's built up on the assumption of 8 hours of DSP time per month. So that's how that monthly rate is constructed. It assumes 8 hours. And that 8 hours was set, when the rates were developed. And presumably that was built on the idea that there would be 2 one-hour face-to-face meetings with the client per month. And each of those hours would also have 3 hours of indirect support that is not face-to-face with the client. So that's where the 8 hours comes from. 2 one-hour meetings plus 3 hours of support for each of those one-hour meetings adds up to 8 hours. And that may or may not be the appropriate amount, but that's how the rate is constructed. It assumes 8 hours per month.
Is that a fully loaded brick hour, or is that just the BLS and the benefits?
So the fully loaded rates are constructed, and then there is a funding percentage applied to that.
But it does have all the other components to it. That's what you're asking.
Yes.
And I guess the question back to Robert's question is, what is the BLS code? Was it vocational counselor, which was what I know was used for the others?
We can go and we'll look.
Yeah. It was.
Okay.
Yeah. Same. It was the same code. Yes.
Caleb, thank you for that clarification. Steve, I still think we value maybe looking at just kind of the math behind it.
Sure.
Just to bring everybody up to speed. Did have one follow-up question for Caleb, though. On your chart right here, we've got a noticeable turn down just before July 2024, which was our timing for LTSS all in. What is the reason you think for that turn down, and does it have to do with transition LTSS?
It could be. I also worried that there might be some retroactivity here. And this data was from January of this year, so it's a full 6 months after, but these claims do take a while to settle as they come in. So the data isn't really finalized for a good year after, before all of the claims have been submitted and they're counted up in these. So I don't know for certain, but I worry that maybe that downturn is in part just that those claims hadn't been finalized at the end of the year.
Love to see if maybe we can check back on that in maybe 3 or 4 months and see if that still looks like you said in that same direction. Because if it is, and that's not the reason, then there's something else going on.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, everybody comfortable for us to go to the general ledger template section of the agenda? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Dr. Smalls. Can you advance us a slide?
Okay, we can go one more. I know we are short on time, so I will give you the highlights. We have been talking about the general ledger template, and it has been a priority of ongoing collaboration for the past 2+ years, starting in 2023. And so as we've been talking about this rate cycle, we are really focusing on reaching out to the provider community and providing technical assistance, like when you need it, what you need, to ensure that we can get to the highest quality data that we can for the upcoming submissions for fiscal 25 at the end of September. So I can give you some quick updates. We haven't had any increase in the number of templates that have been submitted. But of the 298 providers who are required to submit a template, we have heard from 236. So we are hovering at about 79% of providers submitting. And then of our targeted case management providers, 14 of the 18 providers submitted templates for about 78% submissions. The Hilltop team has been reviewing templates with the goal of providing written feedback to every provider who submitted a template. We have reviewed over 150 of the submitted templates, shared feedback with providers, and received submissions back from 66 of those providers. We've continued to meet one-on-one and have met with 50 providers to talk through questions, provide technical assistance. Our offer to meet with providers is continuously open. Feel free to reach out to us on our email address, and we're happy to set that time up. We are going to work on meeting with some of the provider groups in the coming weeks to really solicit feedback for those same questions that we've been asking. What was most helpful? What did you use as you were completing the template? How can we improve the training and technical assistance? What else might be missing or do you need to help with the 2025? As well as, any feedback that you have on the template. We did get a lot of that when we got the templates back in, and so we appreciate your experiences and how we can help to improve the tools and the resources for next year. So we will incorporate all of that as well. And so really our goal is just to get 100% of the providers to submit high quality data for fiscal 25. So we can start really looking at the data and using it in this group to address the priorities that are established. So again, I know we're short on time, but my door is open. Feel free to email me or reach out, and I'm happy to talk with you about your experiences and any feedback that you might have.
Kristen, thank you so much for the technical assistance that you and the Hilltop team years. So definitely seeing the uptick in the traction there, and so hopefully we can get to 100% or very close to in the near future, and then really start getting some good, some well scrubbed data, some pretty decent reports there.
Yes. One other plug real quick. We are going to, the offer's open for peer-to-peer assistance. We have a couple providers who have graciously offered their time and expertise. So please reach out to me if you are interested in being connected. And we are going to do some targeted outreach to those providers we haven't heard from yet, and offer to make that direct connection as well. So.
And thank you to the providers who are willing to do that peer-to-peer as well. We understand it's a lot on your plates, and so your willingness to work alongside us and help us get to a better place with this data is greatly appreciated.
So I'm gonna double down on that comment. So one of the reasons why you were asked to be part of the RAG was you represented more than just your organization, that you had connections in the DD community, that you were seen as a leader and a resource in the DD community. And so we want to make certain that we leverage your position. Give us feedback from those entities that they're struggling in X, Y, and Z. If those are entities that are struggling, go back to them and reiterate the resources that are available through Hilltop, the resources that are available with the peer-to-peer. And that's the only way we're going to get the 80 up to the 95 to 99 that we need of high quality data. We may have 80% submitted, but that doesn't mean we have 80% high quality right now. And that's the challenge that Kristen is trying to address by offering all this additional one-on-one assistance and peer-to-peer assistance. So we need you to use your position in the DD community to bring the more challenged providers to the table so that we can help them.
Can I just offer that I know in the past, Max has been able to help with Max members in terms of helping to connect if there's an issue with somebody not submitting. Sometimes people didn't submit, they didn't catch that it wasn't submitted, or they didn't realize it, or they've submitted it and somehow it isn't being seen. So if there's something we can do, please let us know. We're happy to help.
Thanks, Laura.
So, excuse me, we're at time. We did have some updates that we can push to the next meeting regarding the employment services work group and the retooling of that work group. You all should have a copy of the MOU, and then Rhonda is going to give a waiver update, but we can push those updates to the next meeting. We can, sorry, no time for public comments, but a lot of great conversation, very productive. Our next meeting is on April 10th. So we look forward to seeing you there. And the next slide will show the remaining meetings for the year. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our Deputy Secretary to close this out.
Again, just the next slide, please. This is where you can find our materials, website, available to you at any time. We're really looking forward to our ongoing discussions. Today was a great meeting. Thank you so much for everybody's participation. Lots to take into consideration as we look forward to building on to this year's priorities. I Again, just thank everybody for your participation today. I'm very full from the healthy conversation that we had this afternoon. And so we'll be getting together very soon, April 10th. Please reach out to us, and please reach out to the Hilltop Institute if you have any questions about the GL template. If you have any other suggestions that we can take into consideration for meetings, we're here. Thank you, everybody, for your participation today. Take care. Okay, I gotta get back to the office.